we are. David, how you doing? It's been a long
Good.
time.
Yeah. I really enjoyed our last conversation, I guess, a couple of years ago, and looking forward to this one too.
Yeah, no, this has been really nice. For anyone who doesn't know who David is, David, you want to just introduce yourself so folks can hear more about you and what you're up to, your background.
Sure. Okay. So I'm the CEO of MeetUp. If you don't know MeetUp is the world's largest platform for finding and building connections. We have 57 million people who use MeetUp, and they attend about 200,000 different communities and groups all around the world. In addition to that, I am a professor at Columbia, and I teach strategy and entrepreneurship. I have a podcast called Keep Connected. And last but not least, I have a book coming out on Tuesday.
Yay!
Woo! Called Decide and Conquer.
I didn't know about the podcast. How long have you had that for?
So I've had it for about a year.
Okay.
And it's about, we have two different types of guests.
Yes.
It's always about community and the impact of community and inspiration and education. So one group is like people who have written books and are experts in the field of building community. And the other group is people who are meetup organizers, who are in the trenches, kind of building community, small groups at a time. Maybe they have 30 people in their group or 50 people in the group or even 1,000 people in their group. And they're not per se experts, from an academic standpoint, but they know how to build community, the importance of community, how it changed their lives. Just amazing stories about people who, sat around playing video games all day and now are running like 1,000, 2,000 person communities, or someone who was homeless and MeetUp helped them to get them, their first job, and, inspirational stories like that.
I love it. Well, it's actually interesting to me because, I think when we first got to know each other, you may have still been with Investopedia. I'm not certain.
Oh, wow.
Or maybe you were like just on the back end of that. And so I always thought of you more, business leadership and understanding elements of business investments and whatnot. So talk me through the pivot a little bit. How did you get to MeetUp, although that could be an interesting story by itself, but it seems like now you're sort of all in on the idea of MeetUp, of community, of the value of interpersonal. And that wasn't something that I was really aware of when we first got, our relationship started. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. So I've always been kind of obsessed with the power of people and the power of connecting with people. My first career started off in human resources, actually. And I was a human resource manager and focused on motivating people and managing people and recruiting people and just how to elevate people to be as maximally successful in business as possible. So that kind of where I started off my career is in that area. And then I moved up the ranks and became a CEO. And as CEO, you spend a lot of time building culture. And I had, through the 20 plus years, I'd always loved MeetUp. I'd always gone to MeetUp events. And then someone on the board of WeWork called me up and said, "Hey, we acquired MeetUp, but we are going to bring in a new CEO. And are you interested in becoming, the first outside CEO of the company to take over for the founder who had been there for 16 years?" Which is not easy to do, of course. And you also get to work with Adam Newman and all the, get to ride the WeWork craziness. So it really spoke to me. And I've always been kind of obsessed with community, growing up Orthodox and being Orthodox myself and just living the life that we live. There's so many elements of MeetUp that really resonate for me, whether it's the concept that MeetUp uses technology to get people off of technology to actually get together in person. And that kind of reminds me of the Jewish Sabbath, or whether it's the importance of having, multiple people during prayers and the community that's involved during that. So it's always been a big part of my life, and much more so actually than investing. Sure, I invest on the side, and investing in education was important, but MeetUp is a lot more aligned to kind of the things that are more important to me than investing. So
interesting. Yeah. I'm just curious, in your community, and this is kind of like an informal conversation. You're up in
White Plains, in Westchester County.
Thank you. Yeah, Westchester. That's what I was saying. Too many syllables for me without any caffeine on a Friday. Anyway, on a more serious note, so have things, quote, fully restored in your community at this point? Are people still masking in shul? What's going on? Are people
the Jewish community.
In the Jewish community. Like, Are you fully populated? Is everyone back in prayers and whatnot?
Yeah. So
What's going on?
so we have two different services. Um, one is mask optional, and one
Okay.
is still for people who want to have masks in one of the
Okay.
shuls. And in the
Mhm.
other synagogue, we also have two different services, so people can, if they feel they want to be in a place where people are wearing masks, they can. But most people are going to the mask optional and not wearing masks to the mask optional.
Mhm.
And it's wonderful. It's great. It's good to be
Yeah.
that kind of back to normalcy. And, Purim
Yeah.
holiday is coming up, and I always read from the, not always, but last year I started reading from Megillah, and
Mm.
I'm doing that again this year. And,
Yeah.
hopefully it'll be a happy, joyous time.
I sure hope so. So we got to cut to the chase here because I know you had reached out. I'm super excited for you, by the way.
Thank you.
I'll sort of do a selfish self plug as a way of getting to your piece because I don't know if you have anything to physically hold at this moment,
I
or do
got
you?
something. Yeah.
Oh, good,
Woo!
good, good. Okay, so
Just
we
got
can
it in the
all
mail.
we can both hold it up. So I have a book that I wrote a few years ago, and it's a for entry level or emerging leaders, and really for leaders of any stripe. But I think it speaks specifically for those who are just getting started. And David, you are now, unless there's one that I don't know about,
Nope.
you are now in the ranks of the published author. So welcome. And on top of it, you have been published by a well-known publishing house, and that again is
HarperCollins. Yep.
HarperCollins. Okay, very well known. And so pick your book up again, share with us the title,
Okay.
and let us know a little bit about it. What is
Okay.
it
And I see
about? What
Libby
motivated it?
Hyken has a question too. So I'll do this, and
Oh,
then we
really?
could also answer
Okay, so
Libby's
I'm
question.
not. You know what? I got to see that here. Okay. Um. Okay, so we'll come back to that question soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hi,
So go
Libby.
ahead, David.
So the book. So I've always been obsessed with decision making, and the fact that we make thousands of decisions like every day, and we don't even realize how many decisions we're making, and
Tons.
tons of decisions.
Yeah.
And if I could help people in some way, shape, or form to make smarter decisions with different decision making kind of values or frameworks or things to prioritize, it's a great way to hopefully help people and give back. I always wanted to write a book about decision making, but the problem was I didn't want to write a boring book. I want to write a book filled with like crazy stories and experiences. And then being part of WeWork and being part of like the Adam Newman experience and being part of a company that went from 47 billion to 40 to 20 to 30 and all the things that happened in between, and having to run MeetUp during the pandemic, there were just so many decisions. And I remember once, reading a quote from Roosevelt, and the quote was that the best decision is a good decision, the second best decision is a bad decision, and the worst decision is no decision.
No decision.
And so many people think that when you're not making a decision, you're pushing something off, but what you're pushing off is the ability oftentimes to succeed. And so I've just been obsessed with it for a long time. And after going through that crazy experience that we had with Adam Newman and WeWork, I just really wrote 75,000 words in a short period of time, and then of course editors helped to fix it. But the book has best practices essentially around decision making. So for example, and then Libby, hopefully we'll get to your question next, but like an example is best decisions get made when there's a lot of disagreement. The more disagreement that there is, it facilitates better decision making. And if you're in a situation where you don't have any elements of conflict, anyone on the side, if you're a leader and you don't surround yourself by people who have different perspectives and opinions than you do, and they're just yes people around you, you're not going to end up making kind of successful decisions. And I just talk about other examples and stories about kind of the impact of decision making and try to do it as entertaining as possible. That's the book.
So tell us the choice of well, actually, do you want to respond? I'm not quite sure what youhelp.com is. I do see Libby's comment.
Let me
so
see.
I'm not sure without clicking on it and going.
Yeah, hold on. I could try. Let me see. I'm going to go to
I mean, we could probably do that and get a better sense of what it is.
.com. I'm going to youhelp.com.
But in the meantime, while you're doing that, David, maybe I could ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm curious about your title. So I think this was it. Decide and Conquer, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so it's a playoff of Divide and Conquer, I'm sure.
Exactly.
I'm sure that wasn't accidental.
Nope. My wife came up with it.
Okay, love it. right? And your wife is a coach as well, if I'm not mistaken.
She is. Good memory. Yeah.
Okay.
She's an
Yeah.
executive
Good
coach
stuff.
too.
All right. So maybe you'll talk us through a little bit of your framework
Yeah,
for
sure.
what it is that you, because like you talked about, there are decisions of all types and stripes, right? So for example, I live not terribly far from my synagogue. I will often walk. It's uphill from where I live. Today I was surprised. It was like 21 degrees when maybe even lower, maybe 19. When I stepped outside, I thought it was going to be like a high of 40, so I expected it to be like 30. Usually there's like a 10 or so degree differential. But I'm stubborn. Like I don't wear a coat unless I absolutely have to. And sometimes when I'm running late, I've got to walk versus drive. All sorts of like little decisions.
Yeah, little things.
Not
Should I
even
wear a
the
coat?
big
Should I wear a
things.
coat? Should I walk?
Right,
Should I drive?
right.
All those things.
Which socks to wear?
And you're not going to sit around doing a
Right.
pro cons list every single time you make those
Exactly.
decisions.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
there've got to be levels, right? So the decision of which shoes to wear versus the decision of how do we manage our next, let's call it, strategic priority during a pandemic when we are a social, right, community and we're supposed to be meeting in person and we can't, obviously. Those are totally different, right?
Yes.
Involve one person versus countless people, and even the one person in this case is maybe even making a subconscious decision almost, as opposed to a very thoughtful, deliberate process. So I'm sure you have some kind of way by which you break that down.
Yeah. So the thing that I like to talk about a lot, and maybe Libby, this could help you as well. And I just looked at You Help, so I understand you're a charity crowdfunding network, which is awesome. By the way, I should spend more time actually looking at it, and awesome that you do that. So the thing that I spend that it's important to focus on first is understanding your decision making biases. And there's like 4 biases that I think come up all the time. And I'll share with you those biases. And then by understanding where you are on that bias spectrum, it helps you to then kind of make smarter decisions because you're like, oh, I always fall into that trap. And how do I avoid falling into that trap? So here's an example.
Okay, before you continue, I hope everybody who's listening knows that David's going to share this, but you still have to buy the book.
Thank you.
Which is available on Audible, I believe, as well.
Yeah, Audible, Kindle.
I got it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I have it. It's in my library.
Thank you. So here's some biases. So number one bias that people oftentimes fall into so often is recency bias. So recency bias is essentially overinflating, overemphasizing the thing that just recently happened over other experiences. So for example, let's say that you recently hired someone and the problem with the person is that they weren't nice to their colleagues. They worked really hard, but they weren't a good team player. So even though that's one element that's really important in a person, when you look for the next person, you're probably going to way overemphasize kind of being a team player over some other things like certain capabilities or hard at work ethic or whatever the other things that are important. You're going to way overemphasize the thing that was recently the challenge. And that's one example. Another example for recency bias is, I don't know if you're a person who does yoga or other people do yoga, but at the end of a yoga session, there's something called Shavasana, where you're just lying down. It's meditative. It's very relaxing. And it's people, because they just did that experience, they want to go back to yoga, even though for the previous 50 minutes, they're stretching and they're sweaty and they do all these things. They have negative experience, but the last experience is this positive experience. And that's kind of called recency bias. So that's one, to acknowledge, how do I not get overly influenced by the last thing that just happened, in terms of that next thing that I need to do. Like, let's say you had a terrible time walking uphill to synagogue and you're freezing cold and it only happens one last time. You don't want to necessarily never walk to synagogue just because that last experience was such a not great experience. You want to okay, that happened 1 in 10 times. It just happened to have been the last one. The other one that I talk a lot about and I really deeply believe in is sunk cost bias. So, and the sunk cost fallacy, that so many people, let's say you spend $100 on a really nice meal in a restaurant, Prime Grill, wherever you go, right? They're not sponsoring this, I don't think, but wherever you go. And they're not yet. They spend $100 and you're stuffed halfway through after the appetizer and half your meal, but you force yourself to eat the rest of your plate, which makes you less unhappy because you're oh, well, I just spent so much money. Now, I have to eat all the food. people, or I just put so much time. I spent 3 years into doing something. I can't stop doing it. If I stop doing it, I'm a failure. They don't think like, okay, I spent it the time. I need to move on. What's the right thing to do at this time? People overemphasize how much work they put into something previously in terms of what the right thing that they should be doing for themselves kind of right now. And that's another bias that leaders and other people have. So
I think
the
you had
first
that, David, with stock investing, right? And
oh my God.
Right? So many times people continue to throw good money after bad, all because of that same mindset.
Correct. And the right way to approach stock investing is to say, had I not invested, would I still want to proactively invest right now? And if the answer is no, then sell your stock, because if you wouldn't have wanted to invest right now, then you shouldn't hold the stock that you still have. So It's a perfect example of sunk cost fallacy, and that people will just, and they call it, whatever.
Have you ever heard of Brian Tracy's Quink analysis?
No, tell me about it.
It's called Quink, is an acronym for knowing what I now know. So you ask your client, or you ask the individual in front of you, your team member, whomever, knowing what I now know. Like, for example, you hired somebody and you're 2-3 years into that working relationship, and things just aren't going well, right? But you have them on staff. So what do? Right? So the Quink analysis says, in effect, knowing what I now know, right? Would I have hired the person from the beginning? And if not, where do I take it from here? So it's a matter of trying to extricate yourself from your previous decision,
yes,
by looking at it now from a more, let's call it, objective and neutral.
I love it. And let me just share what Netflix does. And then Libby asked a question. So Netflix, in the book No Rules Rules, which is like a really great Bible for leaders, one of the things that Netflix does is they say, if I wouldn't hire this person right now for this role, then I probably should ask this person to leave and have someone else come into the role. I know that sounds like terrible and like not very nice. You shouldn't just do that. You should give the person feedback, and you should try to coach the person, all the other things to try to get the person to be at the right level. But if you don't believe it's the right person, you wouldn't hire this person now, then you should evaluate, is this the right person to be there? So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go to Libby here, if that's okay, Naftali? Thank you. I just, she's so nice to have written a couple of questions. Libby asked, what about at first you don't succeed, tweak it and try again? So I am a deep believer in the importance of iteration and the importance of getting something out there. Like, it's called an MVP, Libby. You might have heard of that concept, a minimum viable product. And you yourself could be a minimum viable product, meaning you get yourself out there before you're even ready, for an opportunity. See what works, see what doesn't work, get feedback, and then iterate and change it based on what's working and what's not working. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make in decision making is they analysis paralysis, and they wait too long to get out there and see what happens. And because they failure so much. But in reality, and when the book talks about, for me, like one failure mistake that I made, another failure mistake, another failure mistake, like over and over, lots of failures and mistakes that I made throughout. And you learn a lot from it. And like you wrote in your question, you tweak it, and then you try again, and you get back out there, and hopefully you don't even succeed. You just fail less, and you keep failing less until you then are able to succeed. So it's so important not to beat oneself up if one succeeds. If one succeeds the first time, every single time, you're probably not challenging yourself enough. And then that's a problem in itself, is what I would say.
For sure. I'm actually looking for it now, David, but I'm almost certain that the podcast that we recorded together, if it wasn't entitled Fail Fast, it was definitely a topic that we dove into.
Nice.
I'm looking for it. I'm going to grab the link to it. Here it is. So give me a second, because it's a little bit. You were episode 37, which I just released 92.
Woo!
Not that long ago. So thank God, making 92
progress. Is a good year. I did my year in Israel in 1992. So
did you really? Okay, yeah. So we overlapped, because I got there, I guess, a year before you. Anyway, I'm grabbing the URL finally. Here it is: Failing Fast and Driving Forward with David Siegel.
There you go.
Look at that.
Well, I think people learn best when you talk about vulnerabilities and challenges, and you learn yourself the most, but I think other people can learn from it too. And people have this mistaken cult or perception of like the CEO or the successful leader or person, that like life is just like perfect. And like step 1, step 2, step 3, and it all just like looks, it's not. It's like a roller coaster of ups and downs and curveballs and challenges. And the more that you realize that everyone goes through it, and it's painful, the easier it is to go through that challenge yourself and to know that you're going to get out of it in hopefully a positive way.
I totally agree. And I actually started asking all of my podcast guests at every episode for their biggest failure and what they gained from it, how they grew from it. Because to your point, David, I think Hollywood and you mentioned Netflix earlier and other forms of media. No, I wouldn't say that it's a universal thing, because I think we do build up the rags to riches element of people's stories, but not necessarily the failure parts of it. And even if we do, it's not necessarily what people see most. They see the success, they see the finished product. So it really is important to remind ourselves, because otherwise we live in this Instagram world in which the finished product looks so tempting, whether it's people putting themselves out there.
Book, but they don't know what this book looked like and how messed up it was before it got through the editing job.
I'm sure. Not only the book itself, but the stories that contributed to the book. Yes. All of them, I'm sure, were a big mess, so to speak. Okay, so I know we're kind of running out of time.
I can take.
And I want to give you the opportunity. Yeah, we have a few more minutes. So first of all, let everybody know when the book is coming out, where they can grab a copy. Are you doing anything? Since you're the big community live guy, I'm not sure if you have anything in person planned for this. So talk us through your process here.
Okay. So, gosh, I still want to talk about failure. Actually, I'll just say that Forbes.
Fine, talk about failure.
No, very briefly, not telling. And then I'll
go
ahead. But I just want to point it out, and maybe you can look for it while we're doing, if you don't mind, while I'm talking. Forbes just wrote an article and referenced a enormous failure that I talk about in the book. You could probably type in Forbes Decide and Conquer David Siegel, and you could find it. You could share it with people. And the author kind of almost apologized to me afterwards, being like, David, the worst thing that you did, huge mistake. Like, I made a whole article about it. The person who wrote it is Ira Bedzo. He's an ethicist.
Okay, so it's not the one I'm looking at, because that was a Kimberly something that I saw.
No,
okay.
When
did it come out?
Yesterday, actually. Ira, IRA. Ira is the person's first name. Bedzo, Bed. Let's see. I can tell you here, because I have this name while I look at Bedsow. If you type in that in Forbes and the thing, you can find it. But anyway, it talked about how after doing a layoff, I felt the need to be liked by others too much, and to make sure that people didn't feel stress and worry that there would be another one immediately. Thank you.
I just dropped in the chat there.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you. And I told people, we're done. There's not going to be any more layoffs. And then a year later, I had to eat crow, and people said, I thought we were done. And I never should have said that. I never should have given a false impression of certainty about something. And I did it for the wrong reasons. I did it to, I talk about the difference between being kind and being nice, to be nice. And it actually wasn't the kindest thing I could have done, because it set a false expectation for people. And Ira's article that you just shared, it's actually an incredibly well-written article by a PhD professor, ethicist, kind of talks about ethical challenges around honesty and how to be, how to be 100% truthful when there are times that you may not want to be, et cetera, and how to make that determination. So I thought I would just reference it on the failure thing. But anyway, getting back to your question before we go, I'll just say that that if you go to the website, decideandconquerbook.com, then anyone who pre-orders the book will be invited to the New York Book Party launch that I'm going to have, and also a Zoom launch that I'm going to have as well. You just need to share your confirmation in it, or you could even just email decideandconquerbook@gmail.com a copy of your order, and you'll be invited to a New York party that we're having at the end of April. We pushed it off. Actually, no, sorry. In early April, in about 4 weeks from now, we pushed it off because of COVID. Now we could have it in person, indoors, and have a great time. And also because I teach at Columbia. Columbia is having a reception for me as well in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
It is definitely lonely and it's challenging. And you're right, Libby. Because you don't necessarily have colleagues, you oftentimes do feel the need to be liked. But that's why it's also helpful to have a network of other colleagues that are leaders in other organizations, to help as well. And thank God, I do have that. And I'm sorry, Libby, that I never answered your question really effectively on how MeetUp or the book could be helpful. But feel free to just, send me a LinkedIn.
I'm just sort of sticking this up here. That I think. Oh, can you read that?
It's lonely at the top. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice. I think it's the last chapter. Anyway, go ahead.
Feel free to send me a LinkedIn message, and then we could kind of go back and forth there as well, because that would
Nice.
be
Okay.
that would be
Well,
enjoyable.
David, as we say in the vernacular, Mazel Tov. That's an incredible feat. I'm so glad for you.
Thank you.
And looking forward to consuming your content, your ideas, and your strategies to help me and maybe help my clients as well with decision making. And I want to wish you, since today is the second day of the Rosh Chodesh celebration, but the first official day, if you will, of the second month of Adar, which is the month of Purim. I want to wish you a festive period ahead and joy in so many different ways. A Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, and to everybody who has been with us and anyone who's going to be consuming this in the recorded fashion as it gets posted afterwards. I want to thank you all for your interest. Reach out to David. If you want to learn more, I think he's given you plenty of contact information, certainly for the book, and always happy to chat.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Purim Sameach.
You got it. Bye-bye now.
Take care. Bye.